Nobody wanted to adopt the sick triplets from the orphanage, until a billionaire father told the children, "I will find a cure. What happens will make you cry." The alarm rang at 6 o'clock in the morning, as always. Miles Carter opened his eyes and stared at the white ceiling for a few seconds before getting up. 38 years old, a successful businessman, owner of a tech company that grew every month. In theory, he had everything. In practice, he lived in a house that felt like a museum. He walked down the polished wooden stairs, his bare feet making the only sound in the morning silence. The kitchen was spotless, counters clean, no dishes in the sink, coffee set to be ready at exactly this time. Everything ran like clockwork. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat at the dining table that could seat 8 people, alone, as he had been for the last 2 years. 2 years since Ellie died. His phone buzzed with work messages. Contracts to review, meetings to confirm, numbers to analyze. Miles replied to everything automatically, his fingers typing responses he already knew by heart. His company practically ran itself now. He had built something so efficient that it hardly needed him anymore, which was both good and bad. He showered, put on a grey suit, one of 12 identical suits in his closet, and went downstairs again. In the living room, he did what he did every morning. Looked at her photo. Ellie, at 5 years old, smiling with 2 missing baby teeth, holding a drawing she had made at school. Messy brown hair, bright eyes, that smile that lit up any room. The silver frame was always clean, always in the same spot on the shelf. Next to the photo, the little lampshade she had chosen for the living room, a pink lampshade with colorful butterflies. "To make the house happier, Daddy," she had said. Miles turned on the lampshade. He did that every morning, even though the house was already full of natural light. His car was in the garage, tank full, dashboard spotless. He drove through the streets of Cedar Falls without hurry. The town had 40,000 inhabitants, the kind of place where everyone knew each other but respected one another's space. Perfect for someone seeking peace, or for someone wanting to hide. At the office, the employees greeted him with the usual respect. Miles was a good boss, fair, punctual, never raised his voice, but he also never got too close. Business was business. The meetings went by as they always did. Numbers up, targets met, new projects approved. Miles participated, made decisions, signed papers. His mind worked perfectly for business. It was just his heart that had stopped 2 years ago. He returned home at 6 in the evening. He ate a sandwich standing in the kitchen, reading emails on his phone. He went up to the home office and worked until 9. Then he came down, turned on the TV, and watched the news. It was 10:30, time for the check-in. He climbed the stairs again, but this time he stopped in the hallway. The third door on the right was closed, as always. Miles turned the doorknob slowly. It was Ellie's room. The bed was made with the lavender comforter she loved, a small table with crayons still scattered, a bookshelf with children's books organized by size, stuffed animals sitting in the tiny armchair, everything exactly as she had left it. Miles entered, turned on the light and looked around. He didn't touch anything, never touched. He only looked and remembered. He remembered the morning she couldn't get out of bed. He remembered the doctors explaining words he didn't want to understand. He remembered how she grew weaker each day but kept smiling. He remembered the last "Good night, Daddy" he heard. He turned off the light and closed the door. In the living room, he checked if the lampshade was still on. It was. He sat on the sofa and stayed there in silence until he felt sleepy. That was always how it was. Every day the same, a routine that kept him going but not living, until the day March 15th arrived. It was Ellie's birthday. She would have turned 8 today. Miles woke up feeling different. He couldn't explain what had changed, but something had. He went down to the kitchen and, for the first time in 2 years, didn't turn on the automatic coffee maker. He used the Italian stovetop coffee maker that Ellie loved to watch work. "It looks like magic, Daddy. The water goes up by itself." He sat at the table with the cup in his hands and looked out the window. March was ending, but it was still cold. The garden trees were beginning to sprout new leaves. New life was being born. At the office, the hours passed slowly. Miles signed contracts without reading them carefully, agreed to proposals without paying attention. His mind was elsewhere. He returned home earlier, 5:30. In the living room, he looked at Ellie's photo longer than usual. Then he went up to her room. He stood at the door for a few minutes before entering. This time, he sat on her little bed. On the table, he saw the little bracelet she had made during her last week of life. Colorful beads strung on thin thread, made with great effort and little skill. Her little hands were already weak, but she had insisted. "It's so Daddy remembers me," she had said. Miles picked up the bracelet and placed it in the palm of his hand. The beads were blue, red, yellow, and green. Some were slightly crooked, one was cracked. But it was the most beautiful thing he owned. He closed his fingers around the bracelet and something happened. For the first time in 2 years, he cried. It wasn't a quiet cry. It was a cry that came from the depths of his chest, filled with longing, anger, and love that had nowhere to go. He cried until he had no more tears. When he stopped, something had changed inside him. He looked around Ellie's room, her toys, her books, the little clothes in the closet, and understood one thing. She was gone. But the love he felt for her had not disappeared. That love was still there, inside him, waiting. "I still have love inside me," he said out loud, to the empty room. "Maybe this love needs to find another place." He went down the stairs holding the bracelet. In the living room, he looked at Ellie's photo, then at the pink lampshade with butterflies, and then he knew exactly what he needed to do. He would visit an orphanage. Miles spent 3 days thinking before acting. He wasn't the type to make impulsive decisions, even when it was something so personal. He researched orphanages in the area, read about adoption procedures, tried to understand how it all worked. On Wednesday morning, he called the Greenwood Children's Home. "Good afternoon, I'd like to schedule a visit," he said into the phone, his voice firmer than he expected. "Of course, Mr. Carter. What kind of visit? Are you interested in adoption or is it a social visit?" Miles hesitated. I'm still deciding." The woman on the line was kind. "No problem. How about tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon? I can schedule you with Director Margaret." "Perfect." After hanging up, Miles stood in his office for a few minutes. He had taken the first step. There was no turning back. On Thursday he left work at noon. He had lunch at home, changed his suit for jeans and a polo shirt. He didn't want to look too formal. Children got scared of men in suits. The Greenwood was a 20-minute drive from downtown Cedar Falls. It was a 2-story building painted light yellow, with a well-kept garden in front. It looked more like a school than the orphanage Miles had imagined. In reception, a young brunette greeted him with a smile. "You must be Miles Carter. Margaret is expecting you." He followed her down a corridor decorated with children's drawings. Voices of children came from various rooms. Laughter, chatter, the normal noise of a place full of life. Margaret was a woman of about 50, grey hair tied in a bun, a gentle but tired look, the kind of person who had seen a lot in life. "Mr. Carter, it's a pleasure. Please, have a seat." Her office was small but cozy. Photos of children on the walls, some drawings stuck to the small fridge in the corner, a plant that needed water. "What brings you here?" Margaret asked, getting straight to the point. Miles took a deep breath. "I lost my daughter 2 years ago. She was 6. He paused. "I'm thinking about adopting." Margaret nodded, neither pitying nor surprised. She probably heard stories like that every day. "I'm sorry for your loss, and I admire your courage." She leaned forward. "Do you have any preferences? Age? Gender?" "I'm not sure yet. I'd like to meet the children first." "Of course. Shall we take a look around?" Margaret led him through the corridors. They passed a classroom where 8 children were doing homework with a teacher, through a cafeteria where some kids were having snacks, through a playroom filled with toys and noise. The children were of all ages, babies, toddlers, some teenagers. Some ran up to Margaret asking for attention. Others simply observed Miles with curiosity. "How many children live here?" Miles asked. 42 at the moment. Most stay only a short time. We find families for them quickly." Margaret paused. "Others stay longer." They entered the main recreation room. It was large, with colorful mats on the floor, shelves full of books and toys, low tables for drawing. There must have been about 15 children in there. Most were occupied. One group played with building blocks. 3 boys were competing on an old video game. Some girls played with dolls in a corner, and then Miles saw them. In the farthest corner of the room, near the window, 3 little girls sat silently. They didn't play, they didn't talk. They just watched the other children with a look that seemed far too old for such young faces. They were identical, completely identical. Short brown hair, cut in a practical style, pale skin, too thin. They wore simple, clean clothes, but the clothes looked too big on them. "Those 3, Miles said, discreetly pointing. Margaret followed his gaze and sighed softly. "Sloane, Tessa, and June. Triplets, 5 years old." Something in her voice made Miles look at the director. "How long have they been here?" "Since they were babies. They were abandoned at the hospital when they were born." Margaret lowered her voice. "They have a degenerative genetic condition. They're always tired. They can't play like the other children." Miles felt something tighten in his chest. "Degenerative?" The doctors explained that it affects their muscles and energy. They get tired very quickly. They need to rest more than normal. And Margaret hesitated. "No one has ever wanted to adopt them. No one. People come here looking for healthy children. When they find out about the girl's condition..." Margaret shook her head. "It's understandable, I think. Not everyone is prepared." Miles looked at the 3 again. They remained there, quiet, as if used to being ignored. "Can I talk to them?" Margaret seemed surprised. "Of course, but they're very shy." They crossed the room. The other children continued playing, but Miles noticed some stopped to watch. They got close to the triplets. "Girls," Margaret said softly. "This is Mr. Miles. He came to see you." The 3 lifted their eyes. Miles saw they were brown, the same shade as their hair, but there was something in them that took his breath away. Resignation. As if they already knew they weren't what he was looking for. "Hi," Miles said, crouching in front of them. "Can I sit here?" The girl in the middle nodded slightly. Miles sat on the floor with his legs crossed. "Which one is which?" he asked, trying to sound casual. The same girl pointed to herself. "June." Then to the right. "Tessa." And to the left. "Sloane." "June." The one who spoke for the others. "Nice to meet you, I'm Miles." Silence. The 3 looked at him as if studying his face. "Are you here to pick a child to take home?" June asked, her voice low but clear. Miles felt his heart race. The question was so direct, so adult for a 5-year-old child. "I'm meeting the children first," he answered honestly. June exchanged a quick glance with her sisters. Then she looked back at Miles. "You should see the other children," she said quietly. "We're sick." The words hit Miles like a punch. It wasn't self-pity. It was a fact. A 5-year-old stating a truth she had learned in the worst possible way. Miles looked at the 3. Sloane nervously played with her hands. Tessa kept her eyes on the ground. June stared at him, expecting him to stand up and walk away like everyone else, but he didn't stand up. "But I came to see you," Miles said, with a firmness that surprised even himself. June blinked. "Us?" "You." For the first time, the 3 seemed to awaken from something. Sloane stopped fidgeting with her hands. Tessa raised her eyes. June tilted her head, as if trying to understand a puzzle. "Why?" June whispered. Miles didn't know how to answer. He didn't know how to explain what he felt when he saw them there, so small, so alone, so resigned. He didn't know how to say that there was something in them that reminded him of the quiet acceptance Ellie had shown in her last days. "Because you caught my attention," he said simply. Miles looked at the triplets for a few more seconds. They watched him as if trying to memorize his face in case they never saw him again. "Girls, it was a pleasure meeting you," he said, but he didn't stand up yet. "Will you come back?" June asked, so softly that Miles almost didn't hear. He looked at the 3, and he knew at that moment that something had changed inside him. "I will," he said, and he meant every word. Miles stood up slowly. The triplets remained seated, but now there was something different in their eyes. A tiny spark that hadn't been there before. Hope. He waved and walked away with Margaret. When they reached the door of the room, he looked back one more time. June, as Tessa and Sloane were still in the same spot, but now they were whispering among themselves. For the first time, they looked like 3 5-year-olds. Miles couldn't sleep that night. The image of the 3 girls sitting silently in the corner of the room stayed vivid in his mind. Those brown eyes, resigned and yet filled with a silent dignity that shouldn't exist in such young children. At 3 in the morning, still awake, he made a decision. The next morning, he arrived at the office earlier than usual. He sent a concise email to his assistant. "I need to take the day off. Handle what's urgent and reschedule my meetings." At 9 o'clock, he was in front of the biggest toy store in town. He waited impatiently for 10 minutes until it opened. He was the first customer to enter. "Good morning," he said to the saleswoman, a middle-aged lady arranging a shelf. "I need dolls." The woman smiled. "Of course, sir. What kind of dolls?" "We have the latest models, the ones that talk, the ones that—" "I need 3 dolls," Miles interrupted. "Exactly the same." "Oh, triplets?" the saleswoman asked, with that commercial enthusiasm. Miles hesitated. "Yes, triplets." The woman guided him down an aisle filled with colorful toys to the doll section. There were dozens, maybe hundreds. Dolls that cried, that walked, that spoke pre-recorded phrases. Dolls with extravagant hair and excessive makeup. "No," Miles murmured, looking around. "Something more simple." Then he saw them. On a more discreet shelf, 3 cloth dolls with embroidered smiling faces. Brown yarn hair, simple dresses, no unnecessary glitter or accessories. "These," he said, pointing. The saleswoman seemed surprised. "Oh, those are more traditional. They don't do anything special." "Perfect," Miles said, picking one up. The doll was soft, light, and had a gentle face. "I need 3 identical ones." The woman checked the stock. "We have 4 of that model." "Great. I'll take 3. While the saleswoman prepared the dolls, Miles looked at the doll clothes section. An idea came to him. "Do you have separate dresses for those dolls?" "Yes, we have some basic models. I want 3 dresses, 1 red, 1 blue, and 1 yellow." At the register, Miles watched as the saleswoman carefully wrapped each doll in different colored paper. She seemed intrigued by this man in a suit, buying simple dolls on a Tuesday morning. "Are they gifts for your daughters?" she asked with a polite smile. Miles hesitated again. "Yes, for my daughters." Something about the way he said those words made his heart race. By noon, he was back at the Greenwood Children's Home. Margaret greeted him with evident surprise. "Mr. Carter! We didn't expect to see you so soon." "I promised I'd come back," Miles replied, holding the bag of gifts. "Are the girls available for a visit?" Margaret hesitated for a moment. "They're in the recreation room, like yesterday. But I should warn you that today is not a good day for Tessa. She's more tired than usual." "I understand," Miles said. "I won't tire them. I just want to give them something." Margaret led him through the same corridor as the previous day. On the way, an assistant approached her, whispering something urgent about a broken pipe. The director apologized. "I need to take care of this. Do you mind going to the recreation room alone? It's at the end of the hall." "No problem." Miles walked slowly, trying to organize what he would say. He paused at the door of the recreation room, observing for a few seconds before entering. The triplets were in the same corner as the previous day. Tessa was lying on a small sofa, while Sloane and June were sitting on the floor nearby. They had no toys. They didn't talk. They were just there, like little birds waiting for time to pass. None of the other children approached them. Miles took a deep breath and entered. The children nearest the door noticed him first. Some recognized him from the previous day and whispered among themselves. The whispers quickly spread across the room until they reached the triplets. June lifted her head and saw him. Her eyes widened for a moment before returning to their usual neutral expression. She poked Sloane, who also looked. Tessa remained lying down but turned her face toward him. Miles crossed the room directly to them. ignoring the curious glances of the other children and the caregivers. He stopped in front of the triplets with the bag in his hands. "Good afternoon," he said, smiling. "You came back?" June said, not as a question, but as if stating something surprising. "I said I would come back," Miles replied, crouching to be at their level. "How are you today?" "Tessa is tired," Sloane replied, speaking for the first time in his presence. Her voice was almost identical to June's, perhaps a bit softer. Miles looked at Tessa, who watched him with large, tired eyes from the small sofa. "Hi, Tessa. Is it okay if I sit here with you for a while?" The girl nodded slightly. Miles sat on the floor, placing the bag beside him. The three looked at it with undisguised curiosity. "I brought something for you," he said simply. June and Sloane exchanged quick glances. Tessa struggled to sit up on the sofa, supporting herself on her elbows. Miles took the 3 packages from the bag and put them on the floor, between them. One for June, one for Tessa, and one for Sloane. The girls looked at the packages as if they had never seen gifts before. Miles noticed, and with a pang in his heart, that perhaps they had never received individual presents. "You can open them," he encouraged. June was the first to extend her hand, hesitant, toward the package with her name. She took it so carefully that it seemed she feared it might vanish. Sloane copied her. Tessa needed Miles's help to reach hers. The 3 held the packages without opening them, looking at Miles as if waiting for more instructions. "Just tear the paper," he said softly. With careful movements, they began to unwrap the presents. June was first to reveal her doll in the red dress. Her eyes widened. It's for me," she whispered. "Just for you," Miles confirmed. Sloane opened hers next, revealing the identical doll in the blue dress. Tessa was last, discovering the doll in the yellow dress. The 3 remained silent, looking at the dolls with expressions Miles couldn't decipher. For a terrifying moment, he feared he had made a mistake. Then Tessa hugged her doll to her chest, squeezing it so tightly that her tiny fingers turned white. June ran her hand over her doll's face, as if checking if it was real. Sloane gently stroked the fabric of the blue dress with reverence. "They're the same," June finally said, looking at her sister's dolls, "but different." "Like you," Miles replied. "Unique, but connected." Something passed through the eyes of the 3, an understanding beyond their years. "Thank you," Tessa said, so low that Miles almost didn't hear. "You're welcome," he replied, feeling his throat tighten. In the weeks that followed, Miles established a routine. He visited the girls 3 times a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays after work, and Saturday mornings. Each visit brought something new: storybooks, crayons, small games that didn't require much physical effort. The triplets now waited for him, always in the same corner, but with a different energy. The dolls were always with them, carefully preserved. Miles learned to recognize their rhythm. He learned that Tessa got tired faster, that Sloane was the most observant, and that June was the protector of the 3. He learned to tell stories that made them smile, to draw with them when they had energy, to simply sit in silence when they were tired. One afternoon, while telling a story about 3 adventurous princesses, he heard something he had never heard before: a laugh. It was Sloane, laughing at a funny part of the story. June and Tessa soon joined in, and the sound of their laughter, light and clear, made something inside Miles expand. It was after that visit, when he left them laughing together, that he looked for Margaret in her office. "I want to adopt them," he said, without preamble. Margaret, who was organizing some papers, looked up in surprise. "All 3?" she asked, although she already knew the answer. "All 3, Miles confirmed. "I know it's not conventional. I know it's complicated. But I want to give them a home." Margaret put the papers aside and took a deep breath. "Mr. Carter and Miles, I need to be honest with you." She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "The doctors believe they have at most 6 months to live." Miles felt as if the ground disappeared under his feet. He knew about the girl's condition, of course. He knew it was degenerative, but hearing the prognosis in concrete numbers, 6 months, made his stomach sink. "What exactly do they have?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "It's a rare condition that affects the muscular system and energy production in the body. It gradually worsens. Margaret looked at her hands. We've tested various treatments, but they only slow the process. There's no known cure. Miles remained silent for a long moment. 6 months, another loss, another inevitable goodbye. But then he thought of the three sitting in the corner of the room, hugging their dolls, laughing at his stories. He thought of June saying, "We're sick," with that acceptance that no child should have. They deserve to live each of those months with joy, love, and dignity, he said finally, his voice firm. "I want to be that someone." Margaret looked at him for a long moment, searching for any sign of hesitation. She found none. Her eyes filled with tears. "I'll start the process," she said with a trembling smile. "It will require a lot of paperwork, evaluations, home visits, and it will need to be done quickly, given the circumstances." "I'm ready," Miles replied. The director nodded, discreetly wiping away a tear. "They deserve someone like you," she said softly. Miles felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, purpose. That love still inside him had found its place. Miles couldn't delay that moment any longer. After weeks of regular visits to the orphanage, after all the dolls, storybooks, and crayons, he made his decision. The papers were ready. The process expedited thanks to the girl's special condition. That afternoon, he entered Greenwood with a racing heart. The triplets were in the recreation room, sitting in their usual corner. Each held her doll, June with the red dress, Sloane with the blue, Tessa with the yellow. "Hi, girls," Miles said, sitting on the floor beside them. "Can I talk to you about something important?" The three lifted their eyes at the same time. There was a natural synchronicity among them that never failed to impress him. "Is it good or bad?" June asked, always the spokesperson for the trio. Miles smiled. "I think it's very good. I talked to Director Margaret and the orphanage staff. I spoke with doctors and social workers." He paused. "And everyone agreed that I can adopt you if you want me to." Silence. The three stared at him with wide eyes. "Adopt," Sloane repeated, as if testing the word. "Yes, take you to my home, to be a family." Tessa, who almost never spoke, hugged her doll to her chest. "All of us. Of course. All three, together, always." June, always the most practical, furrowed her brow. "But we're sick. The doctors said—" "I know everything about your condition," Miles interrupted gently. "And I want to take care of you, give you the best treatment possible, and most importantly, give you a home." The girls looked at each other, communicating silently, as only triplets can. Miles waited, giving them the time they needed to process. "Can we keep our dolls?" Tessa asked softly. Miles felt his heart tighten. Of all possible concerns, that was hers. "Of course. The dolls are yours, and you will have many more toys too." "When?" June wanted to know, her voice trembling with contained emotion. "As soon as you're ready. The papers are signed. It could be in a few days." Another exchange of looks between them. It was Sloane who finally spoke. "We want to go with you, now." Miles smiled, moved. "We'll have to wait a little bit. I need to prepare everything to welcome you, but I promise it will be soon." In the following week, Miles transformed his house. The guest room and the extra office became children's rooms, each painted a different color. Red for June, blue for Sloane, yellow for Tessa. He bought new beds, dressers, shelves for books. He hung colorful curtains, set up toys, arranged clothes he had bought based on the sizes he had memorized. On each bed, he carefully placed the respective doll, as if it were a guardian waiting for its owner. On the assigned day, Miles arrived early at Greenwood. The girls were already waiting for him at the entrance, each carrying a small backpack, the only belongings they had in this world. Margaret stood beside them, holding a folder with medical information. "They're ready," the director said, with an emotional smile. They barely slept out of excitement. Miles crouched to be at their level. "Ready to go home." They nodded in unison. The car ride was silent. From the rearview mirror, Miles saw the three in the back seat, looking out the window with expressions of wonder and a little fear. Tessa held June's hand. Sloane kept her eyes fixed on the passing scenery, as if trying to memorize the route. "This is it," Miles announced at last. parking in front of the garage. The two-story house with a front yard looked huge to the little girls. Miles helped each of them out of the car, noting how they moved slowly, with the natural caution of those who always had to conserve energy. "Welcome," he said, opening the front door. The girls entered hesitantly, still holding their small backpacks. The spacious living room, with a comfortable sofa and colorful cushions, seemed like a whole new world to them. "Can I show you the rest of the house?" Miles asked, extending his hand. Tessa was the first to take his hand. The other two followed. Miles guided them patiently, showing each room. The bright kitchen with stools at their height by the counter, the dining room with the big table where they would have meals together, the backyard with the newly installed swing. When they went upstairs, slowly, respecting their pace, Miles led them to the hallway where 3 colorful doors awaited. "These are your room," he announced, opening the first door, red like June's doll's dress. The girl entered timidly. Her eyes widened at the sight of the room prepared especially for her, the canopy bed, the red curtains, the bookshelf with books, the toy chest, and in the center of the bed, her doll in a red dress. "It's just mine?" she asked, incredulous. "Just yours," Miles confirmed, "but you can sleep together whenever you want." The reaction was the same for the other rooms. Sloane could barely believe the blue room with her name in decorative letters on the wall. Tessa touched the yellow curtain as if it were made of gold. "We never had separate rooms," June commented, still processing the idea. "You decide how you prefer," Miles explained. "The rooms are here, but you can choose how to use them." The girls spent the afternoon exploring the house, opening drawers, testing the beds, looking out the window at the garden below. Miles observed from a distance, giving them space to get used to their new surroundings. After a simple dinner that Miles prepared, pasta with tomato sauce, something familiar and comforting, the triplets asked to play a bit before bed. In the living room, Miles spread colorful blocks on the carpet. The girls sat on the floor and began building simple structures, working together without needing to speak much. He noticed how their small hands moved carefully, conserving movements. He saw Tessa be the first to stop, laying her head on the carpet, too tired to continue. Sloane was next, sitting a bit away, watching her more persistent sister. June continued for a few more minutes, determined to finish the small tower she was building. Her fingers trembled slightly when she placed the last block. "Done," she said, with a tired but satisfied smile. Miles smiled back, impressed by her tenacity. "It looks beautiful. You're all very creative." He didn't suggest any more activities, noticing clear signs of fatigue. "How about a warm bath and then bed?" The 3 nodded, grateful for the suggestion. After careful baths, another moment when Miles could observe the fragility of their small bodies, it was time to decide where they would sleep. "Can we sleep together tonight?" June asked, speaking for all 3. "Sure. Which room do you prefer?" After a brief silent consultation, they chose June's room. Miles helped them get settled in the large bed, placing the 3 colorful dolls between them. "Good night, my little ones," he said, kissing each forehead. "Good night, Daddy," June replied, testing the new word. Miles felt his heart expand. He left the door slightly ajar and a soft light on in the hallway, as they had requested. He went down the stairs in silence, aware that his life had changed completely that day. In the living room, he picked up Ellie's photo, still in its place of honor on the shelf. "We have a family again," he whispered to the smiling face in the picture. The butterfly lampshade remained on next to the photo, as always, but now its light seemed brighter, illuminating not just memories but new possibilities. Miles sat on the sofa, exhausted but at peace. There was much to learn about his daughters, their preferences, their specific needs, their individual rhythms. But he was already beginning to understand their limits, to recognize when they needed to stop, to respect the energy conservation they had to practice. A family was being born there, under that roof. Different, fragile, with limited time. But a family nonetheless. And for Miles, that was all that mattered. The first month as father of 3 girls passed in the blink of an eye. Miles had completely reorganized his life to accommodate the triplets' special needs. He reduced his workload, delegated responsibilities in the company, and turned the house into a safe and welcoming environment for his daughters. But there was something he could no longer postpone. The medical records Margaret had given him were detailed but incomplete. Miles needed an up-to-date diagnosis, a comprehensive treatment plan, a clear understanding of what they were facing. "Tomorrow, we are going to visit a specialist," he announced during dinner, trying to keep his tone casual as he served more mashed potatoes to Tessa. "Dr. Levin. He will help us understand how to take better care of you." The three stopped eating simultaneously, that mysterious synchronicity that still surprised him. They exchanged glances before June, as always, speaking on behalf of the group. "Is it because of our illness?" she asked directly. Miles had promised himself never to lie to them. "Yes. We need to know exactly what is happening and how we can help you feel better." Sloane lowered her eyes to her plate. "We've been to many doctors." "I know, dear, but Dr. Levin is different. Margaret said he is the best, and you deserve the best." "Will it hurt?" Tessa asked, her voice almost a whisper. Miles felt his heart tighten. "Some tests might be a little uncomfortable," he answered honestly, "but I will be with you the whole time, and afterwards we can do something fun, whatever you choose." June nodded, accepting the plan with that maturity that no 5-year-old should have. "We are already used to doctors," she said, returning to her dinner as if they were discussing something trivial. Miles swallowed hard. Children shouldn't be used to doctors. The next morning, the girls were ready before Miles even called them. Each was wearing her signature color, Sloane in a blue shirt, June in a red jacket, Tessa in yellow pants. And, as always, they carried their dolls as protective talismans. The pediatric medical center was a half-hour drive away. Miles had thoroughly researched before choosing this place, reading reviews, checking credentials, consulting specialists. He wanted the best for his daughters, and Dr. Levin was consistently mentioned as an authority on rare genetic diseases. The building was modern and welcoming, designed not to look like a hospital. Colorful murals decorated the walls, and small play areas were spread throughout the lobby. Even so, Miles noticed how the girls clung to him when they entered, a conditioned reflex from years of medical experiences. "Good morning," the receptionist greeted. "We have an appointment with Dr. Levin at 9 a.m. Carter." Miles Carter with Sloane, June, and Tessa. While they waited, Miles tried to distract them with a simple animal guessing game. It worked for a few minutes until a nurse in a colorful uniform appeared with a clipboard. "Carter, Dr. Levin requested some preliminary tests before the consultation. Can you follow me, please?" The next hours were filled with a battery of tests. Blood draws, during which the girls didn't shed a tear. They were already familiar with needles. X-rays, where they remained perfectly still, as if conserving energy were instinctive. Pulmonary function tests, gait analyses, strength evaluations. Miles watched everything with a lump in his throat. The girls' silent obedience was almost worse than if they protested or cried. It showed how accustomed they were to being examined, treated like specimens rather than children. Between tests, he encouraged them with small compliments, promised fun activities later, told funny stories to distract them. Each smile he managed to elicit was a small victory against the clinical environment. Tessa, the most fragile of the three, tired first. Miles carried her in his arms from one room to another, while June and Sloane walked beside him, each step visibly requiring effort. Around noon, after the last round of tests, they finally met Dr. Levin. The doctor was not what Miles had expected. Instead of the stern specialist he imagined, they met a middle-aged man with untidy grey hair, round glasses, and a genuine smile under a neatly trimmed beard. "Hello, girls," he greeted, without the condescension adults often show children. "I'm Dr. Adam, and you must be Mr. Carter." "Miles, please," he replied, shaking the extended hand. The office also surprised him. Instead of the typical clinical coldness, it was welcoming, with comfortable armchairs instead of hard chairs, shelves full of books and small toys, and walls decorated with vibrant paintings. "Please, take a seat," said the doctor, indicating the armchairs. Then, looking at the girls, "You can choose where you want to sit. There are floor cushions if you prefer." The triplets exchanged looks, surprised by the freedom of choice. They opted for the colorful cushions, sitting together with their dolls in their laps. "Well, let's talk a bit," Dr. Levin began, pulling a chair to sit closer to them. "First, I want to say that you have been very brave today. All those tests aren't easy." The girls didn't respond, only watched the doctor with that silent caution they always showed around strangers. "Mr. Carter, Miles," he continued in a more professional tone, "I read all the girls' previous medical records and reviewed the preliminary results from today's tests. I'll be direct and honest with you." Miles nodded, feeling his heart race. "The triplets have a condition called congenital mitochondrial myopathy type B. It's a rare genetic disease that affects mitochondria, structures responsible for producing energy in cells. That explains the extreme fatigue, muscle weakness, and other limitations they present." Miles swallowed hard. Hearing the official diagnosis in that office, with the girls sitting silently on the floor, made everything painfully real. "Is it degenerative?" he asked, his voice almost failing. Dr. Levin interlaced his fingers on his knee. "Yes. The condition tends to progress over time. Muscles gradually weaken, including those of the heart and respiratory system, which can lead to serious complications." Miles felt his stomach sink. He looked at the three girls sitting on the floor, seemingly distracted by their dolls. But he knew they were listening. They always listened to everything. "Is there any treatment?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "There is no cure," the doctor replied frankly. "But there are treatments that can slow the progression and significantly improve quality of life." "What kind of treatments?" "A multidisciplinary approach is ideal. Physical therapy to strengthen muscles within safe limits. Specific nutritional supplements, regular cardiac and respiratory monitoring. In some cases, experimental medications that assist mitochondrial function." Miles nodded, absorbing every word, mentally already planning how to implement all that. "But," Dr. Levin continued, leaning forward slightly, "there is something the previous records do not show, which I observed in today's preliminary tests." "What?" Miles asked, tense. "A subtle but significant improvement in some parameters," the doctor said with a slight smile. "Some enzyme levels are better than in previous tests. Pulmonary capacity had a small increase. Muscle strength, though still well below normal for their age, is slightly higher." Miles blinked, confused. "Is that possible? I thought the condition only worsened." "Usually, yes. But medicine is not an exact science, Miles. And children are not just collections of organs and tissues." Dr. Levin looked at the triplets with a gentle smile. "They are responding to something that previous tests did not register." "To what?" "Stability, security, consistent affection." The doctor lowered his voice so the girls wouldn't understand. "In the orphanage, as good as the care was, they were just 3 among dozens of children. Now they have a home. They have someone dedicated exclusively to them. That makes a difference." Miles felt a knot in his throat. "I'm not saying love cures genetic diseases," the doctor clarified, "but emotional state influences the physical more than science can fully explain. Children who feel safe and loved respond better to treatments." "What can we expect then?" Miles asked, allowing himself a thread of hope. "Honestly, I can't say for sure. Their condition is still serious and progressive. But with a combination of proper medical care, regular physical therapy, optimized nutrition, and the stable emotional environment you are providing, there is a possibility of significant stabilization for extended periods." June, who was obviously listening to everything, raised her hand as she would in school. Dr. Levin smiled. "Yes, June. How long will we live?" she asked directly, with the raw frankness of children. Miles felt his heart stop for a moment, but Dr. Levin did not seem shaken by the question. "No one can answer that with certainty, June. Not for you. Not for me. Not for anyone in this room," he replied kindly. "What I can say is that with the right care, you can have good days, good months, maybe good years. And that's what matters, right? Having good days, one after another." June seemed to consider the answer, then nodded slowly. The doctor turned to Miles. "I will put together a comprehensive treatment plan. We will need regular appointments. And I highly recommend a multidisciplinary team: physical therapist, nutritionist, pediatric cardiologist. I can refer excellent professionals. I will do whatever is necessary, Miles replied without hesitation. We will take care of everything. I will not give up on them. Dr. Levin smiled, genuine approval in his eyes. I know you won't, and that, Miles, can make all the difference. In the weeks that followed, the Carter household gained a new routine. A gentle physical therapist named Sarah began visiting 3 times a week, turning exercises into games. Let's collect all the colors of the rainbow, she would say, scattering colorful blocks down the hallway for the girls to gather, strengthening muscles without realizing it. A nutritionist developed a meal plan specific to the triplets' needs, rich in nutrients that supported mitochondrial function. Meals became colorful and creative events: monster broccoli, sweet potato castles, carrot cars. Supplements and vitamins were incorporated into the morning routine, turned into an almost magical ritual. Energy potion, Miles called it, making the girls laugh as they swallowed the pills with juice. Miles completely reorganized his work. He began delegating more responsibilities, set up a home office, minimized trips. Evenings were dedicated exclusively to the girls, board games at the living room table, bedtime stories, small victories celebrated enthusiastically. The house, once silent like a museum, now had sounds of life. Occasional laughter, whispered conversations among the triplets, the sound of crayons on paper as they drew for hours at the dining table, and then, almost imperceptibly at first, small changes began to emerge. It was on an ordinary morning, while making coffee, that Miles noticed the first sign. June was going up and down the stairs, holding the handrail, but without stopping to rest as she usually did. "What are you doing, sweetie?" he asked, worried she might be pushing herself too hard. "Sarah said that climbing stairs strengthens legs," she replied, panting but determined. "I'm training." Miles watched, amazed, as she completed another ascent without showing the exhaustion that would have overtaken her in the past after just a few steps. In the past, a single climb would have left her worn out for the rest of the morning. Now she was challenging her limits, testing new possibilities. With Tessa, always the most fragile of the 3, the change was equally subtle but significant. During play sessions in the living room, Miles began to notice that she remained engaged for increasingly longer periods. Previously, 15 minutes of continuous activity was her absolute limit. Now she could spend half an hour, sometimes more, building block towers or coloring her elaborate drawings. "Look, Daddy," she said one afternoon, showing a drawing where 3 girls played in a garden. "It's us in the park." "It's beautiful, Tessa. You worked hard on it." "I'm not so tired today," she answered, with a small smile that lit up her pale face. And she returned to her drawing, adding flowers and butterflies, without needing to pause for breath. Sloane, always the quietest and most observant, surprised everyone when she began showing interest in simple household tasks. One morning, Miles found her in the kitchen, trying to reach cereal jars in the cupboard. "Need help?" he offered. "I want to set the table," she replied, determined. "You always do it alone." Miles helped her reach the jars, the plates, and the cutlery. He watched how she arranged everything on the table with meticulous care, pausing to catch her breath but then continuing again. It was a simple task, something many parents might not notice, but Miles knew what it meant. Sloane now had enough energy to care about something other than merely existing. She had strength to want to help, to feel useful, to actively participate in family life. At the follow-up consultation, a month after the first, Dr. Levin did not hide his surprise at the results of the new tests. "There is a consistent improvement in several parameters," he said, examining the numbers. "It's subtle but significant. They are responding well to treatment." "The girls are different," Miles confirmed. "More alive." "Exactly, and that's what the numbers can't fully capture. The desire to participate, to experience, to try new things." The doctor smiled. "Keep doing what you're doing, Miles. It's working." That night, while watching the triplets play a memory game at the living room table, a game that, weeks before, would have been too exhausting, Miles realized something that moved him deeply. Tessa laughed openly when she found a pair. June celebrated each victory with a little fist pump. Sloane, usually the most reserved, smiled as she watched her sisters have fun. Small moments of genuine childhood joy, without the constant shadow of exhaustion that had dominated every second before. Childhood is awakening in them, Miles thought, feeling tears come to his eyes, slowly but alive. There were still limitations, of course. They still got tired faster than other children. They still needed frequent breaks and special care and constant monitoring. The condition had not disappeared and never would. But something had changed. A spark had been lit. 3 little souls who had accepted their fate with premature resignation were now beginning to glimpse possibilities. And for Miles, that was all that mattered. 5 months had passed since the triplets arrived at Miles's house. 5 months of discoveries, adaptations, little daily victories. The house, once silent like a museum of frozen memories, now pulsed with life. Still calm, still careful, yet undeniably alive. The girls had evolved in ways that even surprised Dr. Levin. These weren't miracles. The disease persisted, the fragility remained, and fatigue was still a constant. But there were improvements no one had expected. Small steps that, added together, formed a new reality. On that autumn afternoon, Miles was working in his makeshift home office in the living room. He preferred to stay downstairs where he could hear the girls playing. They were in the dining room, drawing at the large wooden table, their colored pencils making the only sound in the house, aside from their occasional whispered conversation. Miles was so focused on his reports that he didn't notice when June got up from the table. He only realized she was there when she was already next to an old sideboard, staring at a silver frame. "Who is she?" June asked, her soft voice breaking the silence. Miles looked up. His heart skipped a beat when he saw what June was looking at. Ellie's photo, smiling, holding a drawing she made at school, the silver frame he cleaned every week, religiously, even after the girls had arrived. It was strange, Miles thought, that after 5 months, this was the first time any of them asked about the photo. Maybe they had noticed it before, but had respected that silent space that seemed to belong exclusively to him. "Come here," Miles said, closing his laptop and extending his hand. June approached. Tessa and Sloane, sensing something important was happening, also left their drawings and joined their sister, with that silent synchronicity that always connected them. Miles carefully picked up the frame and held it so all 3 could see better. "This is Ellie," he said, his voice firmer than he expected. "She was 5 years old in this photo, almost your age." June touched the edge of the frame with her small fingers. "Was she your daughter?" she asked directly, with that frankness only children possess. Miles felt the familiar tightness in his chest, but it wasn't as painful as before. It was more like touching an old scar. The mark was there, but the wound no longer bled. "She was," he confirmed, looking at the smiling face in the photograph, "and she still is in my heart." The 3 remained silent, absorbing the information. Miles could almost see the gears turning in their little heads, making connections, understanding pieces of a puzzle that had been incomplete until then. "Where is she now?" Sloane asked, her voice always the softest of the 3. "She got sick," Miles replied simply. "A different illness from yours, but also very serious. She fought hard, but she went to heaven a few years ago." Another silence. The girls seemed to process this information with an understanding beyond their years. "Is that why you leave the butterfly lampshade on?" June asked, surprising Miles with her insight. "Is it because of her?" Miles nodded, moved by the observation. "She chose that lampshade. She said it made the house happier." "And it does," Tessa said, her voice rarely heard in serious conversations. Miles smiled, placing the frame back on the sideboard. He sat on the sofa, and the girls settled around him, June by his side, Tessa on his lap, Sloane leaning against his leg. "Do you have any photos of when you were babies?" he asked, suddenly realizing he had never seen images of them before the orphanage. The 3 shook their heads in unison. "We were left at the orphanage as babies," June explained, always the spokesperson. "We don't remember our mother or father." Margaret said we were only a few weeks old when we got there, Sloane added. We were in a basket with a note. What did the note say? Miles asked, trying to imagine how someone could abandon 3 such special little creatures. June shrugged. It just said we were sick and the person who left us couldn't take care of us. Miles felt a wave of anger mixed with gratitude. Anger that someone had given up on them. Gratitude that they were left where they could be found and cared for. Have you ever imagined what it would be like to have a family? He asked, and hesitating. The girls looked at each other, as if deciding who would answer. It was Tessa, surprisingly, who spoke. We always dreamed of having a family, she said softly, her eyes fixed on her hands. Someone to take care of us. Even knowing we wouldn't last long, June added pragmatically. We saw other children being adopted, Sloane continued, and we pretended that one day it would be our turn. Miles felt his throat tighten. He imagined the 3, smaller, more fragile, watching from the orphanage window as other children left for their new homes, knowing their condition made it unlikely the same would happen for them. But no one wanted sick children, June concluded, without self-pity, merely stating a fact. Miles hugged them then, trying to wrap all 3 at once, as if he could protect them not only from the uncertain future, but also from the past of abandonment and waiting. Now you have one, he said firmly, his voice thick with emotion. A family, and you always will. Even after we... June began, but Miles gently interrupted her. Always, he reaffirmed. Just as Ellie is still my daughter, you will always be my daughters, no matter what happens. They stayed that way for a long moment, hugging on the sofa, under the distant gaze of Ellie's photo and the soft light of the butterfly lampshade. A family formed not by blood or obligation, but by choice and love. That night, while tucking them into bed, Miles noticed something different. For the first time since they arrived, the girls asked to sleep in their own rooms, June in red, Sloane in blue, Tessa in yellow. Are you sure? He asked, surprised by the sudden change. Until then, they had slept together almost every night, as if they needed each other's closeness to feel safe. We are a family now, June explained simply. We don't have to stick together all the time anymore. Miles understood what was not said. They no longer needed to cling to each other as their only safe haven. Now there was another kind of security in their lives. Good night, Daddy, each said from her own room, still testing the word that 5 months later still sounded new and precious. Good night, my little ones, Miles replied, leaving the doors slightly open and the hallway light on, as always. He went down the stairs with a full heart. In the living room, he switched on the butterfly lampshade, which now illuminated not only Ellie's photo but also a new one, the triplets in the garden, laughing at the camera, with their dolls in colorful dresses in their arms. 2 stories, 1 family, a love that transcended time and circumstances. The calendar in the kitchen had a date circled in red. Miles looked at it every morning, feeling a mix of apprehension and hope. Today was the day, exactly 6 months since the triplets had arrived at his house, 6 months since he became father to 3 extraordinary girls, 6 months since the diagnosis that gave them, at most, this amount of time to live. But contrary to the bleak predictions, June, Dior, Sloane and Tessa had not only survived, they were evolving, each in her own way, challenging medical expectations and rewriting their own stories. It was a Saturday with an incredibly blue sky, not a cloud in sight, a rare gift of spring. Miles had planned this day carefully. He wanted it to be special, memorable, a celebration of the life they had built together. Girls, I have a surprise, he announced during breakfast, watching them eat their bowls of colorful cereal. Today, we are going to the park. The 3 looked up at him simultaneously, their expressions ranging from excitement to caution. The big park with the lake? June asked, her eyes shining with anticipation. Yes, that one, Miles confirmed. And it's not just that. Today is a special day. Why? Sloane wanted to know, always curious. Miles hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should mention the true significance of the date. He chose honesty, as he always did with them. Today is exactly 6 months since you came to live with me, 6 months that we have been a family. The girls exchanged looks, that silent communication that still fascinated him. He knew they understood what was unspoken, that today marked the end of the deadline doctors had set. "So it's like a birthday?" Tessa asked, her voice gentle but excited. "Exactly like a birthday," Miles smiled, "and we are going to celebrate." An hour later, they were all in the car. Miles had packed a bag with everything they might need: healthy snacks, water, medications, light jackets in case the weather changed, and even the colorful dolls that continued to be constant companions of the girls, even after 6 months. The park was a 20-minute drive away. It was the largest in town, with an artificial lake, picnic areas, an accessible playground for children with special needs, and, on Saturdays, street performers doing face painting and balloon sculptures. As he drove, Miles watched the girls in the back seat through the rearview mirror. They looked different from the pale, resigned children he had first met at the orphanage. There was color in their cheeks now, a sparkle in their eyes, a contained but present energy in their movements. They still got tired easily. They still needed frequent breaks and constant care. The disease had not disappeared, but something had fundamentally changed in how they faced their limitations. "Look at the ducks," Sloane exclaimed when the car approached the park. Always observant, she was usually the first to notice details around them. Miles parked as close as possible to the entrance to minimize the walk. Even with their progress over the last few months, long distances were still a challenge for the girls. "We have the whole day," he said, helping them out of the car. "We'll go slowly and enjoy each moment, okay?" They nodded, already accustomed to the pace that worked best for them. Periods of activity interspersed with frequent rests. The park was busy, but not crowded. Families spread out on the lawns, children running and shouting on the playground, couples walking hand in hand around the lake. Miles felt a momentary pang, knowing his daughters would never have the exuberant energy of those other children. But the feeling passed quickly when he saw the girls' eyes widen at the possibilities before them. "Can we feed the ducks first?" June asked, pointing to the lake where several birds swam peacefully. "Of course," Miles smiled. "I even brought a little bit of oats to feed them." They walked slowly to the lake's edge. Miles spread a blanket on the grass so they could sit and rest while they watched the ducks. He handed small handfuls of oats to each, teaching them to extend their arms gently so as not to startle the birds. The joy on the girls' faces when the ducks approached, confident, to peck food from their hands, was something Miles knew he would forever hold in his memory. Tessa laughed out loud when a particularly daring duck tried to climb onto her shoe. The sound of that laughter, free, pure, unburdened by illness or fear, made Miles swallow hard, moved to tears. After the ducks, they went to the area where street artists performed. A woman in a colorful apron painted children's faces. There was a small line, but she smiled and invited the triplets to come forward. "What beautiful girls," she exclaimed. "Your triplets, right? How wonderful. What would you like painted on your faces?" The three exchanged glances, suddenly shy. "Can it be a butterfly?" Tessa finally asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Of course. I have butterflies in all colors. Which one do you prefer?" "Yellow," Tessa replied without hesitation. Miles watched as the artist worked with skillful hands, transforming Tessa's pale cheek into a canvas for a delicate yellow butterfly. Sloane chose a blue star, and June, predictable in her preference for red, asked for a heart. When the painting was complete, the girls admired themselves in a small mirror the artist offered. Their faces shone with delight. "You too, Daddy," June insisted, surprising both Miles and the artist. "Me?" Miles laughed. "What should I choose?" "A rainbow," Sloane suggested, serious. "With all our colors." The artist smiled at the suggestion. "That's a beautiful idea. What do you think, Dad?" The word "Dad," coming from a stranger, hit Miles unexpectedly. He had been their official father for 6 months, but hearing someone outside his small circle recognized that reality made it even more concrete. "I think it's perfect," he replied, crouching so the artist could paint his cheek. With their faces painted, they moved to a nearby ice cream cart. It was a small luxury Miles usually avoided because of the girls' special diet, but today was a day for exceptions. "You can choose whatever flavor you want," he said, watching their eyes widen at the colorful options. June chose strawberry, Sloane opted for mint chocolate, and Tessa, always faithful to her preferences, asked for vanilla. Miles got a chocolate one for himself, and they sat on a nearby bench to enjoy the treat, watching the small boats on the lake. "Is it good, Dad?" Tessa asked, her face already stained by melting ice cream. "Delicious," Miles replied, noticing how the word Dad now came naturally from her lips. It was no longer a new word being tested, but an established identity. After the ice cream, they rested for a while, watching the people around them. Miles noticed that the girls seemed to be gathering energy for the next activity. It was a pattern he had learned to recognize. Those moments of apparent inactivity were actually strategic recovery periods. "Can we go to the playground now?" June asked eventually, always the boldest of the three. "Though of course, if you feel up to it," Miles replied, attentive to signs of excessive fatigue. The accessible playground was perfect for them. It had gentle ramps instead of steep stairs, swings with special supports, and rest areas strategically placed. Miles watched as the three explored the space, each at her own pace. June went straight to the small slide, climbing up slowly by the ramp and sliding down with a joyful scream. Sloane preferred the swings, where she could move without much effort. Tessa, the most cautious, tried a slow-moving merry-go-round where she could control the speed. Miles took out his phone and started taking photos. He wanted to capture every moment, every smile, every small victory of the day. The yellow butterflies on Tessa's cheeks, the determined sparkle in June's eyes as she climbed the slide for the third time. Sloane's serene expression as she gently swung, her face turned toward the sun. "Dad, look at me," June called, waving from the top of the slide. "I see you, dear," Miles replied, taking another photo. "You're amazing." They played for almost half an hour, a record for their standards, before the first signs of fatigue appeared. Tessa was the first, as always, sitting on one of the benches with her breathing slightly accelerated. Sloane soon joined her, and finally June, reluctant to stop but aware of her limits. Miles approached with bottles of water and cloths to wipe the sweat from their faces. "You were amazing today," he said, helping Tessa drink her water. "I've never seen you play for so long at once." "It's because today is special," June replied between sips of water. "It's our family birthday." Miles smiled, touched by the way she had understood and named the occasion. "And also because we are stronger now," Sloane added, always attentive to details. "Sarah said our muscles are improving." Sarah, the physical therapist, had indeed commented on the girls' gradual progress in the last session. Small improvements that, must over 6 months, made a noticeable difference. "Do you want to do anything else, or would you prefer to go home and rest?" Miles asked, always attentive to signs of excessive fatigue. The three exchanged looks again, that silent communication. "Can we stay just a little longer?" June asked. "Maybe near the lake again. Just to look." "Of course," Miles agreed, relieved that they recognized their limits without frustration. They walked slowly back to the lake's edge, where Miles spread the blanket on the grass again. The girls sat down, tired but visibly satisfied. June rested her head on Miles's shoulder. Tessa lay partially down, using his leg as a pillow. Sloane sat upright, but leaned slightly against his arm. The sun began to lower, casting a golden light over the lake. Families started packing up, preparing to head home after a day of play. Miles looked at his daughters, their faces still decorated with now-smeared paint, their eyes heavy with good as healthy fatigue. "Today is a day I'll never forget," he said softly, almost to himself. "We won't forget it either," June answered, followed by sleepy nods from Tessa and Sloane. Miles felt his eyes sting. 6 months ago, according to the most pessimistic predictions, this day could have been very different. Instead of smiles, ice cream, and face painting, he might have been facing what he faced with Ellie. Hospitals, medications, the gradual and helpless goodbye. But there they were, tired, yes, limited by illness, yes, but alive. Not just surviving, but living, playing, experiencing, growing. The drive home was silent, the girls asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the adventure. Miles drove slowly, reluctant to end this perfect day, this milestone that meant so much. In the following days, the photos from the park adorned the fridge, colorful reminders of a day of clear sky and light hearts. The girls returned to their routine of physical therapy, medical appointments, and carefully timed play at home. Then, almost a week after the park outing, Miles woke to a sound he did not expect: coughing. It came from Tessa's room. He got up quickly and found the smallest of the triplets sitting on the bed, coughing dryly and persistently. Her forehead was hot to the touch. "I don't feel well, Daddy," she murmured, her voice hoarse. Before Miles could respond, he heard another cough from June's room, and then, as if following an invisible script, Sloane appeared at the door of Tessa's room, pale and clearly feverish. "You too?" he asked Sloane, who only nodded, hugging her blue doll to her chest. Panic began to grow in Miles's chest. All three sick at the same time was his worst nightmare. With their condition, even a common flu could be dangerous, overloading systems already weakened. "Let's go to the hospital," he decided, trying to keep his voice calm as he helped each of them get dressed. In the car, he tried not to show his fear, but his mind was reliving those last days with Ellie. The sudden decline, the helpless doctors, the inevitable farewell. He couldn't go through that again. Not with the three. Not now. At the hospital, Dr. Levin was on duty, a stroke of luck that brought some relief to Miles's racing heart. The doctor examined each girl carefully, ran quick tests, and ordered blood work. "Miles, you need to calm down," Dr. Levin said finally, pulling him aside while a nurse tended to the triplets. "Your anxiety is making them more nervous." "They are—" Miles couldn't finish his sentence. "They have the flu," Dr. Levin said firmly. "A strong flu, yes, but just the flu. It's not their condition getting worse." Miles felt his legs give out with relief. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. The tests show classic viral markers, and there are no signs of deterioration in the parameters we monitor regarding their myopathy." The doctor patted his shoulder kindly. "They'll need rest, hydration, and the medications I'll prescribe. But they'll be fine, Miles." Miles nodded, feeling the knot in his throat begin to unwind. "Can I take them home?" "Yes. I'd prefer they stay in a familiar environment. Just keep them well hydrated, and call me if the fever goes above 102 degrees Celsius or if their breathing becomes very difficult." The following days were intense. Miles arranged the rooms so that the three could stay together, making it easier for him to monitor them. He set up a humidifier to ease their respiratory passages, followed the medication schedule rigorously, and barely slept, checking their temperatures throughout the night. The girls, used to facing physical discomforts, were surprisingly patient. They didn't complain, took the medicine without protest, and even tried to cheer each other on when their energy allowed. On the third night, when the fever finally subsided and the cough began to improve, Miles sat on the edge of the bed, where the three rested together, watching a cartoon on the small TV he had placed in the room. "You scared me," he confessed, running a hand through Tessa's hair, which was closest. "We knew you would take care of us," June replied simply, as if it were the most obvious fact in the world. Miles felt his heart tighten at that unconditional trust. These girls, who had been abandoned, who had spent years in an orphanage constantly reminded of their fragility, now trusted completely that someone would be there for them, no matter what. "You saved me," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "Now it's my turn." The three smiled at him, their faces still pale from the illness, but their eyes shining with the light that had grown progressively over the last 6 months. Miles then knew, with a certainty that transcended diagnoses and prognoses, that they had crossed an invisible barrier. 6 months that should have been their last had become just the beginning. 8 months. It seemed both an eternity and the blink of an eye. Miles watched the triplets through the kitchen window as they played in the garden, a pastime that would have been unthinkable when he first met them. June pushed a small wheelbarrow, carrying dry leaves that Sloane had meticulously collected. Tessa, sitting on a bench, sorted the leaves by color and size, creating patterns on the ground. Simple movements, ordinary play, but to Miles, each of those was a small miracle. 8 months ago, any of those activities would have exhausted the girls in minutes. Now they could play for nearly an hour before needing to rest. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Dr. Levin confirming that afternoon's appointment. It wasn't just any consultation, it was the comprehensive evaluation they had scheduled, with extensive tests to check the current state of the disease. Miles couldn't help but feel apprehensive. The girls were visibly better, but he knew appearances could be deceiving when it came to degenerative diseases. There was a possibility of invisible internal progression, even as external manifestations seemed controlled. "Girls," he called from the back door, "time to get ready to go to the doctor." The three lifted their heads simultaneously, that mysterious synchronicity that always fascinated him. They didn't show fear or anxiety, just a calm acceptance. Medical appointments had become as normal as school or bath time. An hour later, they were all in the car on the way to the medical center. The triplets had brought their dolls, as they always did in potentially stressful situations. Miles noticed how he gripped the steering wheel too tightly, his knuckles white from pressure. "It's going to be okay, Dad," June said suddenly from the back seat. Miles looked in the rearview mirror, surprised. The boldest of the triplets was watching him with those serious eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. "Of course it will," he replied, forcing a smile. "I'm just a bit nervous about the traffic." June nodded, but her gaze said she did not believe the excuse. The girls always seemed to know when he was worried, no matter how much he tried to hide it. At the medical center, they were greeted by the now familiar team. In recent months, the triplets had won the hearts of doctors, nurses, and technicians. They were exceptional patients, cooperative, patient, and surprisingly good-humored, considering all they went through. The battery of tests was extensive: blood draws, minimally invasive muscle biopsies, pulmonary function tests, cardiac evaluations, neurological exams. The girls faced it all with that silent bravery that still broke Miles's heart. They didn't complain, didn't cry, they only held their colorful dolls a bit tighter during the most uncomfortable procedures. After the tests, they were directed to the waiting room while results were processed and analyzed. Miles tried to distract them with a word-guessing game, but his mind kept returning to the possible news they would receive. He had read so much about their condition over the last few months. He knew that, even with all the care, mitochondrial myopathy typically followed an inexorable course. "Mr. Carter," a nurse called. "Dr. Levin is ready to see you." Miles took a deep breath, picking up Tessa in his arms out of habit. She always tired more quickly after tests. June and Sloane walked beside him, holding onto his pants like they did when they were nervous. Dr. Levin's office was familiar now, the welcoming environment, the colorful walls, the small toys and books strategically placed. The doctor himself greeted them with his characteristic smile, but Miles noticed something different in his eyes today, a brightness he had not seen before. "Please, have a seat," the doctor said, indicating the comfortable armchairs. "How are my favorite patients today?" "Tired?" June answered honestly, always the group's spokesperson. "I imagine so after all those tests," the doctor smiled. "But you were very brave, as always." Miles could barely contain his anxiety. "And the results, Doctor?" Dr. Levin opened a file on his computer, adjusting his round glasses. His face lit up with a smile that made Miles's heart skip a beat. "I have news," the doctor said, looking directly at Miles and then at each of the girls. "And it's the best news we could hope for." Miles felt like he couldn't breathe. What does that mean?" "It means," Dr. Levin continued, rotating the screen to show graphs and images Miles didn't fully understand, "that the disease has stabilized. No sign of progression in the last months. In fact, in some parameters, we even see a slight improvement." Miles blinked, unsure if he had understood correctly. "Stabilized?" "Exactly," the doctor confirmed. "We compared today's tests to the last full battery and to the initial diagnosis. Their condition, which should have been progressing, simply stopped advancing." Miles looked at the girls, who watched the conversation with solemn attention. They seemed to understand the gravity of the moment, even without fully grasping the medical terms. "How is this possible?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Mitochondrial myopathy is degenerative. All the scientific articles say." "Medicine has its miracles sometimes, Miles," Dr. Levin interrupted gently, and its mysteries. This specific condition is so rare that there are very few documented cases. Most medical literature is based on studies with very small samples. But what caused this stabilization? It's a combination of factors, probably, the doctor explained. The specific medication we adjusted for each of them, consistent physical therapy, optimized nutrition. He paused meaningfully. And don't underestimate the role of a stable emotional environment. Children who feel safe and loved respond better to treatments. This isn't sentimentality, it's science. Miles felt tears fill his eyes, unable to hold them back. He tried to hide his face, but June had already noticed. "Daddy is crying," she announced with her usual frankness. "Sometimes adults cry when they are very happy," Dr. Levin explained with a gentle smile, "and this is news to make you very happy." Miles wiped his tears, embarrassed by his reaction but unable to control the wave of emotion flooding him. "So, they have time?" he asked, his voice caught. "Doctor?" Levin looked at the triplets with an expression mixing admiration and professional affection. "They have childhood, Miles, and they have a future." Those simple words triggered more tears from Miles that he couldn't hold back. June, always the bravest, got up from her chair and went to him, placing her small hand on his face. "Don't cry, Daddy," she said, with a seriousness beyond her years. "We're okay." That simple statement, "we're okay," coming from a child who had lived her entire short life under the shadow of a death sentence, was what finally broke Miles's last defenses. He pulled June into a hug, and soon Sloane and Tessa joined, forming a knot of arms, tears, and pure love. "Doctor." Levin watched the scene with a discreet smile, giving them the moment they needed. "We will continue with the treatment, of course," he said, when Miles finally composed himself, "and we will do regular monitoring. But for the first time since I have known them, I can say with confidence that the prognosis is positive." On the way back home, Miles could barely focus on the road. His mind spun with possibilities he had never allowed himself to consider. School, friendships, birthdays, many birthdays. The girls seemed quieter than usual in the back seat, as if they were also processing the implications of the news. "What are you thinking?" Miles asked, looking at them through the rearview mirror. It was Tessa, usually the quietest, who answered. "We're thinking about our birthday." Miles smiled. The triplets' birthday was approaching. It would be in 2 weeks. He had already started preparations, but now, with this news, the celebration took on a completely new meaning. "And what would you like to do for your birthday?" he asked. The three exchanged looks, using that silent language they shared. "A party," June answered at last. "A real party, with cake and everything." "With friends from physical therapy," Sloane added. "And music," Tessa completed, surprising Miles with her unusual enthusiasm. "Then that is what we will have," Miles promised. "The best birthday party ever." In the next 2 weeks, Miles worked tirelessly on the preparations. He wanted it to be perfect, not just a celebration of another year of life, but a celebration of life itself, of the future now opening before them. He sent invitations to the other children the girls had met in physical therapy and occupational therapy. He hired a baker to create a special cake, in fact, 3 small identical cakes, each in the girls' signature colors, red for June, blue for Sloane, yellow for Tessa. He decorated the house with balloons and streamers, transformed the garden with small tables and colorful chairs, and hired a musician who played guitar and sang children's songs. On the morning of the big day, he woke the girls with a special breakfast, heart-shaped pancakes topped with fresh fruit. "Happy birthday, my little ones," he said, placing the tray in front of them. They had decided to sleep together the night before in a pajama party, just for themselves before the big celebration. "Thank you, Daddy," they exclaimed in unison, that synchronicity that continued to enchant him. The morning passed in a whirlwind of final tasks. The girls, too excited to sit still, helped as much as they could. Sloane arranging napkins, June checking if the chairs were in the right place, Tessa marveling at the balloons with wide eyes. The guests began to arrive at 2 in the afternoon. Children with their own stories of overcoming challenges, some in wheelchairs, others with hearing aids, still others with visible scars from surgeries. Their parents brought gifts and knowing smiles to Miles, that shared understanding of those who also lived hospital days and nights of worry. The triplets, while always so quiet and observant, blossomed in the presence of friends. Miles watched in wonder as they participated in simple games adapted to their limitations, laughed at jokes, and shared stories. When it was time for the cake, Miles lit the candles, 6 and 2 on each cake, and everyone sang happy birthday. The girls, seated side by side at the main table, wearing paper crowns on their heads and radiant smiles on their faces, looked as if they were glowing from within. "Make a wish," Miles instructed after the song. The three closed their eyes simultaneously, concentrating for a moment before blowing out the candles. The small crowd applauded, and the party continued with cake distribution and opening of presents. At dusk, when the last guest had left and the girls were exhausted but radiant, Miles found them in the living room, admiring the gifts they had received. They were few compared to what many children received, but for those who had never had a birthday party before, each package was a treasure. "Did you like the party?" he asked, sitting on the sofa next to them. "It was the best party in the world," Tessa declared decisively. "The best," Sloane agreed. "The best of all," June finished. Miles smiled, feeling a fullness he had only experienced a few times in his life. When Ellie was born, when he held her tiny hands during her first steps, when the triplets called him Dad for the first time. Sloane suddenly rose, walking over to him with a serious expression. Without saying a word, she hugged him, a tight hug full of meaning. June and Tessa joined, forming a knot of small arms around him. "Daddy," Sloane began, her soft but firm voice. "Thank you for choosing us." "You made us happy," Tessa added, her words surprisingly clear and confident. "Now we want to take care of you too," June completed, as serious as always. Miles felt his heart expand in his chest as if he couldn't contain all the love he felt. These three girls, who had come into his life when he believed he would never feel complete joy again, had become his whole world. "You already take care of me," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. Every single day. They stayed that way for a long moment, hugging on the living room sofa, united by something much stronger than blood ties, united by choice, by conscious love, by mutual gratitude. It was June who finally broke the silence. "We have a gift for you." Miles blinked, surprised. "For me? But today is your birthday." "It's a special gift," Sloane explained, getting up to retrieve something hidden behind the sofa. It was a small package, wrapped in colorful paper, clearly wrapped by the girls themselves, with tape in strange angles and a crooked bow but full of care. Miles opened it carefully, preserving the paper that represented so much effort. Inside was a simple wooden frame painted in 3 colors, red, blue, and yellow, and inside it, a photograph Sarah, the physical therapist, had taken a few weeks earlier. Miles sitting on the grass in the garden, with the 3 girls around him, all smiling at the camera, their faces lit by sunlight. A family. "It's to put next to Ellie's," June explained, pointing to the shelf where Miles's first daughter's photo remained in its place of honor. Miles swallowed, standing with the new frame in his hands. He walked to the shelf, the girls following closely. With trembling hands, he placed the new photo next to the old one, past and present, pain and healing, loss and reunion. The butterfly lampshade that Ellie had chosen so many years before still shone brightly, as always, but now its soft light seemed different to Miles. It was no longer just a memorial, a flame kept alive in honor of someone who had passed. It was a symbol of continuity, of a love with no end, only transformation. The living room lampshade remained on, but now, illuminating the love that remained. "We are a family," he said softly, the words almost a prayer. "Forever," the triplets replied in unison, their small voices filled with certainty. And in that moment, under the gentle light of the butterfly lampshade, in front of the 2 photographs that told the story of his heart, Miles knew he was finally whole. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.